Hey everyone, I'm Kat Ellinger and I'm here with Kier-La Janisse to talk about Kayla's wonderful new folk horror documentary, Woodlands Dark and Days Bewitched, which is about to have its premiere at South by Southwest. How are you feeling about that?
Oh, well, I'm nervous. I've never made a movie before, so.
I know. What a movie, though. Total disclosure, I'm in it as a talking head, but I've only just seen the final cut, and it is just so expansive and, I mean, whoa. I guess we start with why folk horror. I know the project started is a different conception, so maybe we could start right at the beginning and talk about how it evolved.
Yeah, well, I mean, like, because originally it was going to be, it wasn't as though I decided, like, I want to make my first movie and I want it to be a movie about folk horror. Like, me making a movie was never really my plan. It's more that, like, I work for Severin Films doing editing and producing DVD Blu-ray extras. And so we were going to be releasing Blood on Satan's Claw. And so I had just proposed, like, oh, why don't we do like a little half an hour folk horror thing that just sort of talks a bit about some of the important films around this context of, 70s and British television and whatever. And David Gregory from Severin was like, okay, sure, go and do it. And so this was actually also my first project at Severin where I was the producer. So before that, I had literally just been an editor working with David as the kind of producer director, giving me notes and working to his direction. This was the first project where he just said, okay, just go do it. And I was like, go do it, like just go interview the people myself or whatever. And he's just like, yeah, you know how to do that stuff. You've been a programmer for years. And, so it was actually the first thing I really like kind of hands-on produced. I have other production credits, but they're kind of more like I introduced someone to someone or I paid money or whatever, But this was the first thing where I was like, okay, organizing schedules and trying to get camera people in remote places to go and interview people and stuff. And it just turned out that I got so much interesting material, and this was even just at the very beginning, asking very basic questions. So when I first was interviewing people, the questions were pretty basic and just like, how do you define folk horror? What do you think are the most important folk horror films? Stuff like that. And even with just that, the stuff I got back from people was so interesting that my rough cut ended up being 2 hours long for what was supposed to be a half an hour thing. And so David Gregory, bless him, was just like, well, just keep going. Just make it longer, and just interview more people. He's like, if there is no feature-length documentary on folk horror, you're kind of like halfway there. So why not just keep going and make one? So it was never a plan where I had this like driving obsession with folk horror where I needed to make a movie and get my obsession out on the screen or anything like that. It all happened in this very like backwards way.
It is, I mean, because I got involved when it was the Blood on Satan's Claw thing, so I've kind of followed this for the last couple of years, and to see how much it expanded, I mean, there was stuff in there that just really, I just didn't expect to see there. The stuff on Australian folk horror just really blew my mind. You go into Mexico, Japan, Slavic regions, like all over the world, and just the organic nature of it. What was the thing that you learned the most from it, do you think?
I mean, one of the things I learned the most was, because I went into it planning to make something that was very focused on British folk horror, that was all about Blood on Satan's Claw and all the stuff around that, my whole perspective and almost everybody's perspective that I spoke to at first was that folk horror was a British phenomena, and that it was, there were books and movies about, books about it, like tons of scholarship in the UK about folk horror. And there was, music, like all these bands that had been inspired by folk horror movies. I mean, it was kind of just its own thing. And so the most challenging thing was really getting out of that, like really trying to not be dominated by that perspective and think about, well, what does it look like? Because a lot of British folk horror, and often when people define folk horror, they are often talking about things that are prominent in British folk horror, which is that there is a fear of there's a fear of the past. There's a fear of like stuff coming out of the past, and the people who still believe in those things, that the beliefs of those people is something that's threatening or scary. Whereas like when you start going around the world and looking at folk horror from other perspectives, like non-colonial perspectives, it's like all these things that the British people are scared of are actually things that become empowering to people in other cultures. It's like, these are not the scary things. These are actually the things that help us defeat the scary things.
Yeah.
You know? And so that became kind of obvious that whatever the horror was different based on whether you're in British folk horror or like Brazilian folk horror or whatever, you know, like, or whether the film was from, because obviously in Brazil, there's a colonial history there too. So it's like anywhere you have the films being made from the colonial perspective, the past is often the scary thing. Whereas in a lot of other folk horror around the world, those ties to the past are really important, empowering things, you know?
Yeah, I think the way that you took it over talked about, I mean, it was great. And there are some really great guys in the documentary, but it was great to see people of colour, lots of women, and just how, depending on who you were talking to, almost everyone had like a different, slightly different, very personal view of what folk horror was. And how it's not really a genre. I think the film really shows that it is more of it's a movement. How many people are actually in the film? Because there are, and how do you manage all of those interviews and get them into a coherent narrative?
Yeah, so there were about 52 people that are actually in the finished film. Although there are more people because I filmed more people, and there was originally a chapter just about music, and so that whole chapter got taken out because it just wasn't gelling with the rest of the film, because so much of it was kind of more production history based, like people talking about the actual instruments and the sounds they made and stuff like that. So it just didn't really fit. So we took it out. It's going to be an extra on the Blu-ray eventually, but that has a whole bunch of people in it that were also interviewed for this that don't actually appear in the main movie, you know, so like musicians and music historians and composers from the films and stuff. But so in the finished film, there's like 52 people, I think. And I edited all those interviews. So when, you know, I worked with 2 editors on the film, Benjamin Chern and Winnie Chung. And so when they got stuff from me, all the interviews had already been edited. So I had gone through all that footage already and made a rough assembly, and in many cases had dropped in clips, you know, like, so I had assembled all the interviews, I dropped in clips, and for the first like quarter of the movie, I'd actually dropped in quite a bit of imagery and stills and things like that, you know. So there was, when Winnie Chung took over last July, her main job was getting it from the sort of pagan and occultism section to the end. You know, everything before that had been done by Ben Chern for the most part. And I had done quite a bit of work on those parts. So, and I feel like you can tell, I can really tell the parts that Winnie edited, because it's much more like psychedelic and fluid in a way. Like all the international section really needed that. It really needed that like blend of, you know, because you are jumping between countries and you're kind of like talking about how these ideas crisscross with each other and stuff. But yeah, so I had edited down all the interviews, and I made a paper edit also. So I had, like, once I did those interviews, I started doing a paper edit, and that way I could tweak the paper edit where it seemed as though if something was missing, like a transition was not working, it's like, well, this is just not connecting to that next idea, you know. Then I would go back sometimes to the raw footage, because I'd be like, I'm positive that so-and-so said something about this, you know, and I would look for that thing and bring it in. Or sometimes I'd have to interview someone new, which is why there's so many people in the movie. Because I kept thinking of things where it's like, oh, it'd be really great if I just had someone to say this. And so then I would have to like look for the person who was like the expert in that thing, so that I'm not just like getting them to, because I didn't want to go to people and be like, hey, you're like a scholar, but can I just get you to say this scripted thing I wrote and pretend like you're saying it? And so I couldn't do that. So I had to pick people who were already experts in those things and just let them say what they thought about it. But the thing that kept happening was that anytime I would go to people to kind of get these closing statements, these things that were going to wrap everything up, they would inevitably bring up some idea that I had not thought of. And then I would be like, oh, that's really interesting. I have to go more into that. And so once I started to, and that just kept happening, you know, over the 3 years, where it was like, there were many times where we're like, okay, we're finishing the movie this month, you know, and I'd interview like 5 more people to kind of get closing wrap up statements. And then they would just inevitably end up like opening a new can of worms or completely expanding the whole thing again. So it was really COVID that probably was like, okay, you're done. You can't interview people anymore, you know.
I think it's wonderful to see it broken out of just that. I mean, obviously I love the British folk horror. That was the folk horror I grew up on. But to see it come out of that box and go to, because it is in a lot of Asian horror, it is in a lot of Czechoslovakian films, Soviet film, just to see that actually explored, because I've never seen it written about, not in any great depth. Like often people will touch upon it, but this felt like everything was just really thoroughly researched. And you know, I love folk horror, but I even had a pad out writing things down. I was like, what's that? And
well, good.
Yeah, I just think, imagine having something like that coming into folk horror. I mean, God, just having all that presented to you, that's like a couple of years journey right there. That I wanted to talk about the graphics though, because also in terms of a documentary, it does have a very particular aesthetic with the graphics and the music and the poetry. Could you talk a bit about that? Is that something you intended quite early on?
Yeah. I knew that there was going to be a lot of information in the documentary, you know, like even if we had managed to get it to 2 hours or an hour and a half, I still feel like it would have been very dense with a lot of information crammed in. And I knew it was going to need these moments to just stop, to just like stop for a minute and let things sink in, you know, and let people breathe a bit, you know. And so I tried in every section to have a place where it would just kind of stop. And you would just get some music and a montage of imagery, and in some cases animation. The poems came pretty early on, I think, because when I was first doing it, I mean, even when it was going to be just an extra for Blood on Satan's Claw, the poems were going to be there. And we had gotten Linda Hayden to record the first one at the very beginning, at the opening credits. And that was inspired really by the Company of Wolves, by like the poem at the end of the Company of Wolves. I was like, because I love that so much, and I was like, I kind of want something that feels like that, you know? And so I was looking for something that Linda Hayden could read that just had this feeling of like a warning, you know, that you're warning somebody about something they're going to go into. And it was actually Gray Malkin, who's, I don't even know if that's his real name, but like there's a band that in the music part that got cut out that gets brought up a lot, a band called The Hare and the Moon. And he, you know, in addition to making music, he also writes poetry and stuff like that. And Folk Horror Revival, this sort of group Folk Horror Revival, have all these books they've published, and they do have ones that are like just poetry. And so I just went through, I must have read 700 poems before I picked that poem, you know. And it's still like an edited down version. The real poem is much longer than that. But, and so I got like Neil Edwards, who interviewed you, who's the director of the Process Church documentary. I got him to film some Super 8, you know, to go around, I guess like most of it is all shot in kind of like the southwest of England. And just filming standing stones and forests and things like that. And then supplemented that a bit on the island where I live. My friend Rachel Lankowski shot some forest footage too. And we just put it with Linda Hayden's poem. And then Ian Ogilvy, I had him do the same because we were doing the interview with him. And, you know, we gave him like 5 poems to read. We didn't use all of them. But it was just something I felt I needed. And And the footage that Ian Ogilvy is originally reading over is from, like, the first time you hear him reading a poem is like old footage that David Gregory had shot of the Wicker Man stumps from way back when he did like the original Wicker Man extras for whoever put it out a million years ago. David Gregory had done a bunch of extras for that. So he just like gave me all of his like raw footage that he had used for that. But yeah, the poems came first, and then the animation, I would say the Guy Madden stuff came second, and that was just
Guy Madden. Talk about an opening statement. So how did that come around?
Well, I am from Winnipeg, so I just have a lot of friends in common, I guess, with Guy Madden. We don't really know each other outside of email exchanges and things. We've met a few times, but we just have some friends in common, some good friends, you know, like my friend Kaylin Battenstall is very close with him. And so Guy and I knew of each other through that, and I'd worked with him on the Nicholas Refn website. I got him to do something for my chapter on there. And I just knew that he did collages and that he did them as kind of a relaxation thing, you know, like it was something that he did that he found really fun and didn't feel a lot of pressure associated with it, like he did with trying to make a film or whatever. And so I thought, well, maybe this is something I could get him to do that wouldn't be crazy, like too crazy out of my budget, because I know it's something he just likes to do, you know. And so I asked him, he made like 200 collages.
Really?
So he made way more collages than we could possibly use, because he knew it was going to end up being like a 30-second. He knew it was going to be like 2 30-second things. And the only instructions I'd given him was one is occult and one is landscape. That was it. That was my instruction. And so, but then he was like, but I can't actually animate them. He's like, I can make the collages, but he's like, but I'm not an animator, so I can't animate it. And so then I got clued into this couple in LA, Zena Gray and Brent Rue, who do like paper collage animation. So I just asked them if they would be able to somehow take his collages and animate them, and so they did that. And then Ashleythorpe did his stuff.
So. Oh yeah, Ashleythorpe was also involved, wasn't it? How about
so he did.
Is that all original music?
What's that?
The soundtrack. Where did you get the soundtrack from? Was that all existing music, or?
No, most of the soundtrack is original. It's by Jim Williams, although there are cues from A Field in England throughout the whole movie. Partially because that's also by Jim Williams, and the movie was 3 hours long, and he was just like, this is a way bigger job than I signed up for, you know. And so he got us permission to use some of the tracks from Field in England, partially to cut his workload down, you know. But also because we had used it as temp. Like we had used Field in England music throughout the movie as temporary music. So he got permission for us to just keep some of that, and then he would compose around it for other stuff. Although in the very last section, the epilogue, there's quite a bit of music from this power electronics artist named Puce Mary. So a lot of that really noisy kind of stuff, that's her.
Is it going to be a soundtrack CD?
I'm hoping so. I'm definitely investigating it.
Yeah. So, I mean, now you've done this, where do you go from here? where do you possibly go from? I mean, it's an opening statement. I watched so many horror documentaries, and watching that one, it was just totally mind-blowing. I think there was just so much to go, and quite often documentaries can just be like light introductions or their production history, and this, it doesn't feel like that at all. It is more like an artistic statement, and it's about people, which I thought came across really well. It's all about the people, and the people that love folk horror and the people that make folk horror. It's not this so I mean, I don't know how many other subjects you can apply that to, really. But do you have any plans for more films? What are we going to see more from you now?
Well, it's weird because I never wanted to make films. I never planned on that or anything. partially I think because I have like a terror of it, because I know that there are many people who go from writing about films to making films, and it's kind of a disastrous transition. And you're like, oh, stick to writing about films, and so I just was like, I always assumed if I tried to make a movie, it would just be terrible, because it would just be full of too many in-jokes that were only funny to me, or like, stupid movie references. And so I had just never thought of it. And I think the context of it starting off as an extra made it much less daunting. I don't think I ever would have proposed making a film. Like it would never have occurred to me to tell David Gregory, like, oh, I want to make a feature film about folk horror and get Severin to fund it. I think it only happened because it happened in this really modular way, where it was like we do a little bit and be like, oh, that's pretty good, let's do more, and we do a little bit more, and it'd be like, yeah, okay, I could see, let's just get more of this or whatever. And so doing it in these pieces like that made it seem much less scary. But having done it now, I do kind of want to do another one just to see if I can apply the things I learned, just like in terms of like efficiency and managing things, like mistakes that I feel that I made. Like when I was working with Winnie, my editor, she would use terminology and I'd be like, I don't even know what that means. Like, like it's filmmaking terminology. I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. And, so it was like, so in some ways, like she had a handicap working on it because she didn't come from the background of being a folk horror expert, right? So she had to really delve in and learn a lot in order to do it. But on the other hand, she knew way more than me because she had made more films than me, so she just knew all these things about the process of how a film should be made that I didn't know, which is partially how she's now a producer credit on the movie, because she ended up implementing systems that we used just to keep track of all the clips, and documents, that everybody would share. And, she kind of created a lot of those systems because I had just never done it before. So in a lot of ways, she was hugely helpful in like keeping the film on track, But yeah, I do kind of want to make another one because I now want to see if I can do a better job. But if I do one, I think it
better job than a huge, expansive, with an incredible soundtrack and Guy Maddin. I mean, I'd love to see more film from you. I just, I like to go deep on a subject. So quite often I'll watch something and I'll think, and this one, I think I met my match with it because it was like, and I just came out of it. I mean, I only saw it yesterday, so I'm still processing it and just, I can't wait to see people when they get to see it for the premiere. And I know some reviewers have seen it already, and it's just really exciting, and to see more women doing this kind of stuff, because there's not many women in producing, not even in the disc extras world, let alone these types of films. And women often come into it with, as you've shown, with a completely different perspective. And and you can see that you've come into it really open to, who can we get into this? Who can we get involved, rather than, okay, we'll just present it as the, several established experts will go with A, B, C. You've really grown with it. And I think it does have that kind of feminine energy to it, like a very creative energy. So I'm always excited when women are doing more creative stuff, but it's, to be where you are now doing that as a woman, I just think is just brilliant. I just think it's really good. And so small films, please.
You want to hear something funny?
Yeah.
So in the sort of paganism and occult section, how you sort of have the last word, right? And you are like feminine world takeover, and you laugh. Yeah. And then there's like a shot from the witch. Yeah. And she's laughing. That's actually your laugh.
Seriously, is it?
We layered
him really well.
You layered your laugh on top of her.
Oh, see, I feel honoured now. And I'm just in there talking about dancing around the maypole. which
But yeah, I loved that. I didn't actually even notice that. I didn't know the editor had done that until like there was a part where I had to check through the dialogue mixing, and they just send you a dialogue track on its own. So there's no pictures, there's no music, there's no clips, nothing. It's just, so there'll be long stretches of complete silence, and then someone will say something because you're just checking the dialogue track. And it wasn't until that all the dialogue was isolated like that I realized that she had taken your laugh and like layered it over that.
That is amazing. See, I thought, oh, that's really flawless how they've edited. I didn't even know it was me. So that is funny.
Yeah. But I just want to talk about Ashleythorpe, who is a animator based in Devon. And he did the opening credits. He did the animation with the pop-up book in the American section, and he did the in the international section, you know, so all three of these are like completely different styles of animation, you know, so he's incredibly versatile, and he was great to work with because he knew all the, at least on the British side, he knew all those films, you know, he was very familiar with the kind of iconography and imagery. So when I said I wanted the opening credits to look like the owl service, you know, he's like, yep, I got it, you know, he knew what that was. And so he just knew a lot of my references and things like that. And he was really fast and really, I don't know. And his, I don't know, he's a very, really creative person. And I just feel like
he's a filmmaker, isn't he? He did, the Borley
Rectory.
Which is kind of animated live action.
Yeah. Really interesting film about Borley Rectory. Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
For non-British people, I don't know if they know, but it's like the most haunted house in England.
See, I didn't know it until that film came out, so
okay,
I'm a bad British person.
But you did recognize the Stones at the very beginning of the movie.
So. Because I lived not far from them, and Neil obviously popped there. We could have gone and filmed there, which I didn't realise at the time, but you had to go right through there. But the roll right Stones, so I was really excited when I saw that. I think that section, it was like coming home. It was like being presented with my childhood and where I live, and just the whole vibe of it, the animation, the aesthetic of it, the music, just everything. It just felt really like, I don't know, like home. And so I was extra excited when I caught those on the little Super 8. And A3 as well, you've got in there, which is not too far from me, which is where they filmed Children and the Stones. So it really does, like, it captures everything, not just folk horror as a genre. Because I think folk horror, like just from the British perspective, it has so much culture in it. Like you said, it has the music. It was come from a very particular time in the 70s and the early 80s, which was when I was growing up, where you did have, like they say in the film, counterculture had sort of infiltrated British television, and you had stuff like the Owl Service and Children of the Stones, which, watching them back as an adult, and then I saw them as a kid, I was just like, wow, this stuff was like really dark and sophisticated, and so seeing that represented as just a cultural phenomenon, not just a production history of films, it actually was more, I think the film did a really good job in bringing all that together and showing that, you know, this isn't something, because I know certain people kind of get upset if you try and put like politics into genre film, and I think this shows that you can't separate folk horror from that. So it's got like feminism and witchcraft, it's got lots of stuff about colonialism. I really love the American section and the talk of like the fear of the savage and all the just the fear of the Puritans coming into this native land, and it shows that you really can't separate those two things. So I think it's a remarkable job bringing that all together, because you start in Britain and then you go over to America and then you go here. And so it's not just these are the films, it's like this is what was happening at the time, this is the political base, and it's just like, wow, to bring all that together into one coherent narrative is, having made films myself, you know, mine are just very simple. And I take my hat off to you, seriously.
Thank you. I'm so relieved you like it, because you're one of the first people who's seen it that's in it.
I hate seeing myself.
Yeah.
It's like, oh my God. But I didn't even that didn't bother me, because it was just so cool. Like, I was just too distracted to get like freaked out. So yeah. So there is going to be a Blu-ray. How else can people see this after the festival?
Well, we're hoping that it can have a festival run, over the summer. We're going to, we've submitted it to a bunch of festivals, and we're just hoping that we can be running it in festivals till Halloween or something, And so I think the Blu-ray release date is going to depend a lot on how successful those festival submissions are, right? If nobody's interested, then it'll probably come out earlier. But if it has a good festival life, then we may try to milk that, before releasing it. But there will be lots of extras and lots of special stuff around the Blu-ray, because we've already been planning that stuff for 2 years.
Yeah, it's gonna come with I mean, I did one of the extras on All the Colours of the Giallo, which just one of the extras was that 4-hour Giallo collection, which I did the commentary on. And that was just an extra, like just a little, oh, we just put this on as well with this documentary. So I'm really excited to see what they package with that, especially all the folk horror, which is like my favourite thing. So it's I'm really excited. But thank you for talking to us today. And
yes, no problem. Thank you.